Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Yud Tes begins in the middle of a discussion between Abaye and Rava about P Tikra, whether a ceiling can be counted as a wall. The Gemara will bring a proof, reject the proof, and then have a totally different version of this machlokes. The common theme of the two is the question is, if you have something that's structured for one structure, can it also function as part of an adjacent structure? The Gemara will have some more questions and answers on the subject. The Gemara has an incident where Rav Ashi built a sukkah in a way that encroaches on that issue. Then the Gemara will have discussion of schach that sticks out of a sukkah, 4 explanations as to what the case is and how you explain that. Then we get to 2 mishnayos. First mission discusses a lean-to sukkah that's made of only schach leaning against the wall. And the second mission discusses if you have a mat, and the mat is designed for sleeping on, or designed for schach, can you use it for schach, machlokes, Tanaim, and some question in the Gemara as to what size mat we're talking about, as well as resolving a contradiction in the Mishnah. So let's begin the daf. Daf is the middle of discussion between Abaye and Rava discussing P Tikra. P Tikra means that the edge of a ceiling beam, or its beam, if it's wide enough, is viewed halachically as if it extends downward, its edge extends downward all the way to the ground, and it forms a wall. So the Gemara has been discussing where you have a ring of ceilings formed by achsadras. Those are porticos, like structures that have only a roof and not any walls. And you have this ring, and in the middle there's a space. So you fill in that space with schach. So the Gemara has said that according to Abaye, you should be able to say P Tikra. You should be able to say that the ceilings count as a wall. And therefore, even if you don't have any wall around the schachdin area, the ceilings of the achsadras count as a wall, and it's kosher sukkah. Rava said you don't say P Tikra in a situation like that. The Gemara brings a proof from our Mishnah, which clearly said that in order for a setup like this to be kosher, you have to make sure that the ceilings of the achsadros are less than 4 amos wide from the schach to the houses that they adjoin, because you need to use the walls of the houses as the walls of the sukkah. So if the achsadra itself has a ceiling less than 4 amos wide, you could call it a daif and akuma, and you could use the wall of the house. If, however, it's longer than 4 amos, then it's no good. So that clearly shows that the ceiling itself does not count as a P Tikra ceiling. So it's a kash on Abaye. So the Gemara says that Rava answered for Abaye that we're talking about a situation where the schach is not leaning on top of the P Tikra. It was designed that it's suspended on the exact even level as the roofs, as the Tikra itself. In that situation, you don't have a P Tikra, you don't have an edge of a roof, because the roof of the achsadra flows into the schach part, so it's all one. Therefore, there is no P Tikra, and that's why in this case, even Abaye would hold that you don't have a P Tikra walls, and it's not a kasha that the Mishnah seems to think that you don't have one. Now, the Gemara says this is the version of this machlokes that was discussed in Surah and Pumpadisa. They had a different version, and the machlokes was not about P Tikra altogether. Everybody agrees P Tikra doesn't work in a situation like this. Discussion was about lavud. And that means that there were columns or ribs, there were sticks that were set up as walls all around the schachdin area, in the same case with the achsadros. And those sticks could form walls with lavud. But Abaye said it's kosher, and Rava said no, lavud here is no good. And the Gemara says, why not? What's the problem with the lavud here? The problem is that these reed walls, these sticks that were set up were meant to be a wall for the achsadra. It was not meant to be a wall for the sukkah that you made afterwards by putting schach on the open area that's within all the achsadros, that's between all the achsadros. So, therefore, lavud you don't say on a different structure. This lavud you only say on the structure that this wall or this lavud creation was designed for. Here, you got these walls, these sticks were set up for the achsadros, to be a wall for the achsadros, not for the sukkah, and therefore they don't count for the sukkah. So Gemara says that the halacha ma'is is like the first version, and therefore Rava holds you don't say P Tikra, but you do say lavud even on a wall that it was not designed for. So now there was an incident that Rav Ashi, founder of Kahana, who was sitting in a sukkah, and the sukkah was using an achsadra as one side. That means as follows: the sukkah had two of its own walls. The third wall was open. The fourth wall was a achsadra. It met this achsadra, and it had no wall. There were no sticks. There was no beams. There was no anything. It just met the roof of a adjacent achsadra. So he asked him, "How does this work? You only have two walls. You don't have a third wall. How is your achsadra a third wall?" So the says he showed him there was a third wall. There was a beam, one tefach wide, that wasn't visible from the sukkah. The achsadra was wider than the sukkah, and therefore this beam was flush with the wall of the sukkah, but stuck into the achsadra. According to a different version, it was flush with the wall of the achsadra and stuck into the sukkah, but you couldn't see it from deep in the achsadra, in the wider part where the achsadra is wider than the sukkah. So therefore, it wasn't visible in the place that Rav Ashi was. However, it was visible if you look at it from the other angle, and therefore that counts as the one tefach wide wall that you need for a third wall, as is the halacha. So Gemara says this is compared to a lechi. A lechi in a mavoi is supposed to be something visible, but if it's only visible from people outside the mavoi because it's set up flush to the wall and it's not visible from people inside the mavoi, that's still kosher, and this is the same scenario as that. Okay. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa with 4 explanations as to what the brisa is referring to. The brisa says if you have schach sticking out of the sukkah, it's kosher. You could sit under that schach that sticks out of the sukkah. Now the word that's used is yotzei, schach that comes out of the sukkah. So Gemara has 4 explanations as to what this means. Gemara's first explanation is that you have a sukkah, regular sukkah, and schach sticks out behind one of the walls. Let's say the north wall. The schach protrudes over the north wall. So you're allowed to sit under that schach that sticks out over the north wall. So you're outside the sukkah, you're north of the sukkah, you're allowed to sit under that schach. The Gemara says, well, why? It's not a kosher sukkah. You don't have any walls. The Gemara says, okay, so the cases where the east and west walls also extend along with the schach, and therefore you have 3 walls there. You have the north wall of the original sukkah, which is now to your south, if you're sitting under this extended schach, and you have the east and west walls that extend further. The Gemara says, but you need a minimum size. The Gemara says, it's 7 square tvachim. 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. So the Gemara says, well, you need to have more sun than, you have to have more shade than sun because of the schach. The Gemara says, okay, you have, that's the case. The Gemara says, so what's the chiddush of all this? This is exactly a classic sukkah. What's the problem? The Gemara says, the problem is that these walls were not put up to serve this part. It was put up to serve the main sukkah. And therefore you may think that they don't count. The same type of halacha we've been discussing all along. You may think these don't count as far as the sukkah extension. It comes to teach you, even though they were put up for the original sukkah, they count for the extension as well. They can serve a dual purpose. Okay, the Gemara's second explanation of this is that we're referring to where the schach sticks out on a side of the sukkah that has no walls. Let's say the sukkah has 3 walls. It says north, east, and west, and is missing the south wall. And the schach extends southerly past the end of the west wall. Now the east wall continues with it. So you have one wall. This spot here has one wall. It has a wall east of it. So the schach extends outside the sukkah and it has one wall alongside it. So the Gemara says it's a kosher sukkah. You could sit under that protruding schach because if you think about it, it has 3 walls. It has its one wall and it has the one wall that extends along it. It also is connected to all the other schach, so it has the north wall counts as serving it as well. And you view the third wall, the east wall, as if it's a part wall that connects to this sukkah here. So the chiddush is that even though it extends outward of the sukkah, and you may view it as 2 separate sukkahs, you may say, listen, the original sukkah is without this extension. That original sukkah has 3 walls. Here, where you're extending the schach further, and you have one wall that extends along with it, it's not part of the original sukkah, and this extension only has one wall. Whereas, no, we view it as if it's all one sukkah, and therefore the wall that extends with it applies to it, the back wall applies to it, and the third wall is considered to be a 1 tefach wall in a larger sukkah, and therefore it's okay. Now, the Gemara's third explanation is that we're referring to a sukkah that has kosher schach, Most of the schach provides more shade than sun, but there's one set area that has more sun than shade. So Gemara says, you may think that that's a psol. Gemara says, no, we don't look at that area as if it's a psol itself, as long as you don't have a space that's 3 tefachim wide or more. I don't have to calculate each sub area. I calculate the entire sukkah, and the entire sukkah is more shade than sun, and it's kosher. How does this fit in the language of schach that extends out of the sukkah? So the word yotze is what's used, and it says schach, which is yotze from the sukkah, means that it's yotze from the laws of schach. And it's outside the boundaries of the proper rules of how you're supposed to build a sukkah. Now the Gemara's last explanation is that you have a board somewhere in the sukkah, and it's referring to a sukkah which is a minimum size. It's only 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. You have a board of not kosher schach in the sukkah. That board is less than 3 tefachim wide. So this is kosher sukkah because I could ignore that board and I could use the principle of lavud. Since the non-kosher schach part is less than 3 tefachim, I could view the entire sukkah as being closed with kosher schach, because lavud is always considered closed, and therefore it's kosher. So he says, well, what's the chiddush of this? Why do I need a brisa to tell me that? If it would be empty space, you would know that halacha, because you know that lavud is considered closed. So here it's filled with non-kosher schach. Well, it's not worse. Empty space is more chomer than non-kosher schach, because empty space of 3 tefachim apostles an entire sukkah, while non-kosher schach of 4 tefachim is required to apostle an entire sukkah. So why would I think that this is a psol? Versus the chiddush here is different. The chiddush here is that because you have schach there, but it's pasal schach, since it's less than a sheer lavud, you're allowed to actually sit under that pasal schach. Pasal schach counts as kosher schach when it's within a sheer lavud, and therefore you're allowed to actually sit under it. It fills in the entire 7 tefachim required for the sukkah, and you can sit under it. If it would be empty here, you wouldn't be able to sit under it. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? How could something pasal be mitzdarif to something and serve a function that it itself doesn't have? This pasal schach is not schach at all. How could it connect to regular schach and serve as a schach? Where do you find an example of such a lacha? The Gemara says, I'll show you a place. Mud in a mikvah. Mud that is very liquid, and it pours. So it counts as water as part of a mikvah. So if you need it to be part of the mikvah in order to calculate the minimum size of the mikvah, which is 40 water, you could count this liquidy mud. However, if you have a complete mikvah made out of only liquidy mud, you cannot tovel in liquid mud. That's not considered a tefillah in a mikvah. So you see, even though the mud itself is not kosher for the mikvah, it does combine with the water to fill up the shear that's required for the mikvah itself. Okay, now the Gemara introduces the next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the topic of a sukkah that's built of only schach, without any walls, and it has, the schach itself could function as a wall. So it has 2 cases. One is if you made a bird hunter's hut that is made like a cone, like an oval, by taking a bunch of very wide fronds branches, tying them together at their trunks, and then having them spread out in a circle. So that's schach, both on the sides of you and on the top of you. This bowl-shaped set of branches covers you on all sides. Another example of that is if you take a bunch of sticks of schach and you lean them against the wall, from the wall to the floor, at an angle. So that forms both a wall and a ceiling for you. So in all these cases, the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer says it's possible. You do not have a separate roof and floor here. You need a separate roof and floor. And the Chachamim say it's kosher, not a problem. Says the Gemara, we see in a brisa that Rabbi Eliezer would agree that if you put 1 tefach of wall or ceiling in either of these cases made out of something else, that would be kosher. So if you lift the conical bird hunter's hut off the ground by a tefach, have something holding it up by a tefach, or in the sloped branches that are leaning against the wall, you have them leaning against something that's a tefach from the wall, or held up from the floor by a tefach, that would all be kosher, because then you have a wall and a roof. Even though the minimum size of a wall is not 1 tefach, that's to make an actual wall. Here you have height of 10 tefachim, and you have width of 7 tefachim. The problem is that it's all one structure, it's all one branch that leans, or it's all one hut. So by having only one tefach of a different structure, different material, or a different angle, that kashers the entire thing. So now, the Gemara says, what is exactly the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim? It's whether a sloped tent, a sloped wall, counts as a wall and a roof at the same time. Does this considered to be an ohel? Is this considered to be a structure? Alright, if it's set up in the way, is that considered to be a structure? So the Gemara says, so you see here that Rabbi Eliezer holds it's not considered to be a structure. Now, sometimes that will help you. Let's say you're sleeping in a sukkah and there's a sloped structure over you. There's a what the Gemara calls kilas chasanim. That's a canopy over the bed that's held up by two sticks, one in the center of the headboard and one in the center of the footboard. And the stick runs between the two of them. And the sheet spread over it slopes from the center of the bed downward on each side. So there, it's the same type of structure, the same sloped device which is meant to count as a roof and a wall. But over here, if it counts as a structure, you can't sleep under it. It'll puzzle you. You're not being yoitza the mitzvah of sukkah. But if it does not count as a structure, then you're considered to be sitting in the sukkah itself. So the Gemara says that Abai once found Rabbi Yosef sleeping in a sukkah under one of those things. So he said, looks like you're passing like Rabbi Eliezer against the Chachamim. Why would you go with an individual against a plural amount of people? So he answered, he said, your version of the brisa of the Mishnah is wrong. There's a brisa that switches the opinions. So he says, well, why would you go with a brisa over the Mishnah? He said, because your Mishnah is only one person, it's only one Tana who has the version that way. In order to show that, he quotes a different brisa that describes the opinions the way he said them, and it says that the other version, like we have it in our Mishnah, that the one who apostles is Rabbi Eliezer, the one who says that a slope structure doesn't count, is Rabbi Eliezer. That version of the Mishnah is only Rabbi Nassan who learns that way. And therefore, he says, we don't go with your Mishnah's version of who holds what. We go with the Brice's version of who holds what, because that is the plural amount of people. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. And this Mishnah discusses a mat made out of woven reeds. So this mat could sometimes be used as something to sleep on. It's a sleeping mat. If it's a sleeping mat, then it's a kli, and it's possible to use for the sukkah. Now, the Gemara will show that a smaller mat is generally used for sleeping, a larger mat is generally used for schach. The question will, of course, be, what if you don't know what it's used for? What if it's not set aside for any specific use at all? So the Mishnah is a bit unclear. The Mishnah has the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim say, if you made it for sleeping, so then it's puzzle. If you made it for schach, then it's kosher. It doesn't say what the halacha is if we don't know what you made it for, if you didn't specify what it's for, and that is contradictory, obviously, and the Gemara will discuss that. Now, the Chachamim didn't say, the Chachamim said that we're talking about a big mat. Didn't say anything about a small mat. Rabbi Eliezer just argues, and he says it doesn't matter what size. The same thing is true of a big mat and a small mat. So Gemara says, this is confusing. What's going on over here? First of all, we have a contradiction. What happens if you didn't specify what it's for? The Mishnah said that if it's made for sleeping, it's possible for schach. If it's made for sukkah, it's kosher schach. What if it's made without a specification? It's contradictory implications as to whether that's kosher or puzzle. The Gemara has a few attempts to explain this contradiction, and along the way it'll help us understand what exactly is the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. The Gemara's first explanation is that the Tanakama, when he says conflicting implications, is talking about different cases. One is talking about a big mat, and one is talking about a small mat. If you're talking about a big mat, so then the stama, if you didn't specify, it's assumed to be for schach, and it's only if you specifically made it for sleeping on that it's puzzle. Otherwise, we assume it's a kosher. If you're talking about a small mat, though, so then if you didn't specify, it's assumed to be for sleeping on and is puzzle. It's only if you specifically made it for schach that it's kosher, even by a small mat. So Gemara says, the problem with this is if this is how you want to explain the Mishnah, so what are you going to do in Rabbi Eliezer's opinion? He argues on the Tanakama and it says there's no difference between a big mat and a small mat, but he also uses the same language. He says that if it's made for sleeping, it's kosher, it's puzzle. If it's made for schach, then it's kosher. What'll be if it's not specified? There's contradictory implications between the two. So therefore, Rava says that no, when we explain this, we just say, when we say stam, when we don't specify, that's the same as if you made it for schach. That's what we mean to say. So we say that if you made it specifically for sleeping, it's puzzle. If you made it in a way which we could assume you meant for schach, such as on a where it specifically was made for schach, and or if it was made without any specific intent, so that's kosher. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that's true in any size. According to the Tanna Kama, that's true only in a large mat, not in a small mat. And Rabbi Eliezer came to argue that the same thing is true in a small mat, and he's arguing. So the phraseology of the Mishnah, when it says where you didn't specify, that's included in where it's considered to be like you made it specifically for schach. The Mishnah only talks about a big mat according to the Chachamim, and all size mats according to Rabbi Eliezer, and the Rabbi Eliezer is coming to argue on the implication of the Chachamim that this is not true by a small mat, and he's saying no, it's true by all mats. But the answer to our question is that stam is included in where it's made for schach. So the Gemara says the problem with this explanation is that it comes out that Rabbi Eliezer is arguing on the Chachamim about a small mat. About a big mat they agree, he's arguing about a small mat. He holds that a small mat, stam, is also counted as if it's made for schach. The Gemara says, first of all, the language of the Mishnah doesn't apply the way. It implies that he is arguing about the big mat, because he says that the big mat is like a small mat, that he's changing what the big mat is, not what he's not changing what the small mat is. Second of all, we have a brayso which pretty clearly shows that he's arguing about the big mat, because it says a big mat in the Machlokes of Eliezer and the Chacham. So it specifically says that they're arguing about the big mat, not the small mat. So Gemara therefore says a different explanation, introduced by Rav Papa. He says we'll change and we'll reverse it. We'll go back to our original explanation in the Tanna Kama. Tanna Kama is referring to a large mat and a small mat, and there's no contradiction because a stam, large mat, is made for schach, and a stam, small mat, is made for lying on, sleeping on, and therefore it's puzzle. Rabbi Eliezer comes and he says there's no difference between them in size. He's arguing on the large mat, and he's saying even a large mat, the stam is like the small mat. Both of them are puzzle. Both of them are assumed to be made for lying. The only way it's mutter is if you specify. So it comes out that the explanation as to the language of the Tanna Kama is like we said before. And Rabbi Eliezer, he said, when he says a stam, he means the stam is the same as if it was made specifically for lying, for sleeping on. And therefore it's puzzle. You have to specify specifically that it's for schach. That way he's arguing on the big mat and not on the small.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.